The book of 2 Kings picks up exactly where 1 Kings left off. You might remember that Ahab, a man described in the scriptures as a man who sold himself to do evil in the eyes of the Lord, and was perhaps the worst of all the kings. Again, the Bible says there was never anyone like him in extent of his evil, and yet he did not listen to the truth spoken by the prophet of God. He died in battle just as the prophet said he would, and now his son, Ahaziah, has taken the throne from him. Ahaziah has an accident here. He manages to fall through the lattice of his upper room in Samaria. And so he inquires of a false god, saying, verse 2, "Go and consult Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron, to see if I will recover from this injury." Interesting that in his injury, he somehow gets religious, though his heart is drawn towards all the wrong things. Perhaps you know someone who has been through a season of extreme physical ailment. Perhaps you've watched as they've searched with increasing desperation for some kind of a remedy. There is something about being brought low that causes us to search outside of ourselves for help. The question is, in that moment, do you know where to turn? Do you know the God who can heal not just from physical sickness, but spiritual sickness? Do you turn to him? Tragically, in people's zeal, in people's desperation, they turn to all sorts of remedies, but they rarely turn to the one true God. Well, the king has sent messengers to the territory of Ekron, something like 40 miles away, so it'll be a several-day journey until he gets his response back from the prophets of this false god. However, Elijah is told by the angel of the Lord to go and intercept these messengers and deliver the news to them that because the king has consulted foreign gods, he will now forfeit his life. The irony is, this seems to be judgment from God for his sinful decision to seek out this false god. He might have recovered from this sickness, but he cannot avoid the wages of sin. And so, the king is surprised when his messengers are back with him so quickly. They deliver the message to him that a man said that the king would now die. The king asks, verse 7, "What kind of man was it who came to meet you and told you this?" It seems that he has maybe a suspicion here about the kind of man it was. Of course, this son grew up in the palace. He grew up knowing that this prophet stood face to face with his desperately wicked dad. And so he asks now for a description of the mysterious man who intercepted the messengers. We get a description of what Elijah was like here. He was remarkably John the Baptist-like, you might say. He wore a garment of hair, wore a leather belt around his waist. Similar sorts of descriptions are given to John in the New Testament. And so the king sends some men to go and arrest Elijah, who is sitting on top of a hill. The captain goes and says to him, "Man of God, the king says, come down." Elijah answered the captain, "If I am a man of God, may fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50 men. Then fire fell from heaven and consumed the captain and his men. Youch. So this king has not learned by observing the fate of his father. Will he learn by observing the fire? Well, the question is sadly answered in verse 11, when another captain is sent to his death. The second captain now said to him, "Man of God, this is what the king says. Come down at once." He's added that to the original threat. Well, it's the same sort of threat and it's the same sort of response. Again, the answer is no, and fire falls. The king now sends a third captain. Notice the king has learnt nothing, but this third captain certainly has. This man goes to Elijah, falls on his knees and says, "Man of God, please have respect for my life and the lives of these 50 men, your servants." At which point the Lord steps in, says to Elijah, "Go down with him, do not be afraid of him." So Elijah got up and went down with him to the king. Elijah delivers the message to the king directly now, that because he had the audacity to consult Beelzebub, the god of Ekron, he will die. And indeed, he died. Now, what can we say about a chapter that is so full of fire and brimstone, that is so fierce and fear-inducing? Well, many things. But firstly, when God lays you low, it might well be so that you will seek him and call out to him and cast yourself upon his mercy. Learn from this foolish king. Turn to the right place. Secondly, we are reminded that the wages of sin is death, and that we should not think that when God speaks in terms of punishment being poured out, that he is joking or bluffing or speaking simply in metaphor. No, the Bible speaks of an eternal fire that will never be quenched, a place where the worm does not die and the fire does not go out, a place of weeping, wailing, and gnashing of teeth. Judgment fell on almost everyone in this chapter, except for that one wise captain and his men. What made the difference? The answer is simply this: humility. Humility. May God give you the wisdom to be able to accurately understand the situation you are in, the seriousness of your peril with punishment hanging over you. May you be like the captain and not like the king. Cast yourself upon the mercy of God, and he in his goodness will see to it that the fire will not fall upon you.